Hello everyone and welcome to another session of AP Human Geography with Mr. Elrod. We're continuing on with our conversation of population. And today what we're going to do is we're just going to do a very brief conversation on what has happened to the world's population throughout time. And really, if we look at this particular topic, it's really one of incredible. It's really one of incredible growth. It's one that's pretty shocking and surprising to see how far we've come in such a short amount of time, and what we've been able to achieve in such a short amount of time. Really, if you look at from the beginning of time, whatever your beliefs are on how old the Earth is and all those types of things, from the beginning of time up until about the year 1750, we really only saw slight and modest population growth. And really that had to do with the unsure and unstable situation of life. You had cycles of drought, wars, famine, disease, other forms of pestilence that were coming through societies or hitting crops or whatever it happened to be. And it was a lifestyle that was marked as relatively short, marked by lots of violence, very limited in terms of scientific medical technology that could help people, and very limited scientific agricultural technology which could support larger populations. And so you almost had these boom and bust cycles that would happen, where you had abundance and people were being born, and then something would happen and people would die. So you see this trend to where you only have a population of about 700 million in the year 1750. Now, some figures might differ from that just a little bit. About 700 million in 1750. And again, this just kind of reiterates the point that I was just making. You think about any historical time period up until 1750, and you have all these issues that are going on, and the people don't know how to kind of control a lot of these situations. You had very high rates of birth, but also very high rates of death, and a lot of this had to do with the type of lifestyle that people were living. Most people, 99% of the world's population, is going to be making their living. 95% of the world's population is going to be making their living in some form of primary economic sector. So typically they need more children to help out with the chores. Not only that, you needed more children just to make sure that the children that you had, you knew several of them would probably die. So in order to carry on the family and its name and property and the inheritance or whatever there was, you needed those children. You needed those children for that, and so people would have a large number of children. People would die at relatively young ages, things along those lines. If we look at our current world situation, now this is a number I got last year, so it might be slightly off. Last year we were right about 6.8 billion, so we know right now we're probably somewhere over 7 billion people in the world. And people who study this type of thing think we'll probably, if things kind of keep going in the direction they're going, and we're able to curtail some population growth in certain parts of the world, we'll probably top out around 9 billion people. So I want you to think about that. From the beginning of time up until 1750, the world only had 700 million people in it. So between 1750 and the year 2014, a mere 400 some odd years later, you're talking about we've increased the world's population by over 6 billion people. That's pretty incredible in terms of what it is that we've been able to accomplish in a relatively short amount of time. And we'll talk about what are some of the things that allowed those types of things to happen. But first, here's just a graph to kind of illustrate this concept and this idea. Again, you see relatively modest population growth. Then about right at 1750, you see this very steep increase. So there's some things that have allowed for population to grow in this particular fashion. Number one, you had the first agricultural revolution. Now this was thousands of years ago. The first agricultural revolution was, and this is the first time that we have the domestication of plants and animals. And we'll talk more about this in our agriculture, but just know it's also called the Neolithic Revolution. It's the first time that people began to domesticate plants and animals, and this is when we begin to move from hunter-gatherer societies into farming societies, where we can the food supply is more plentiful, the food supply is more readily available, It's also more steady. You're not having to pick up and move and follow your food supply. You plant it right outside in your pasture, or right outside of the place where you live. That means you also begin to build homes. You start to build villages and societies. Societies start to become more complex, all those other types of things. Okay, so what begins to happen is, because there's more not only more food, but more readily available food, people are able to support more people. They're able to have more children. The communities begin to grow larger. They begin to defend themselves from other communities, and they kind of come together for common defense and things along those lines. So that's really the first step forward in that. Then you have the Industrial Revolution, which takes place right about 1750. And the Industrial Revolution and the Second Agricultural Revolution kind of coincide with each other. And I would probably argue that the Second Agricultural Revolution is what allows for the Industrial Revolution to happen, even though the Industrial Revolution allows for some of the farming technologies and techniques to take place. But the Industrial Revolution begins to really change the nature of society and population shifts as the Second Agricultural Revolution that allows for the feeding of more people and the more abundant food supply. So with the Industrial Revolution, we see an increased use in technology for the manufacture of products, which means that we're going to have mass production of items, which is going to drive down the cost of items. But also means that we're going to have more jobs that are available for people, which means that lower skilled labor can get jobs for a wage. It means people are going to start having fewer children. They're going to they're going to live in different situations. They're going to have to change the way that they survive, in terms of, instead of growing things for themselves, they have to work and then actually go out and purchase food. If you think about the difference between that, farmers, prior to industrialization, things like that, people made or grew most of the things that they consumed, and now they might barter or trade or purchase some supplementary things, but most of what they had, they made themselves. The way that you and I live today is that we go to work, or mom and dads go to work, and we exchange our time for cash, and then we take our cash or paycheck, we go to the bank and we get our money, and then we go to the store and we exchange our cash for the stuff that we consume, and we don't actually make much of anything. In fact, I would venture that most of you watching this video make absolutely nothing that you consume. So it's a complete shift in the way that people are living and the way that people are surviving. Now again, the Industrial Revolution and the Second Agricultural Revolution really coincide with each other, and it's connotated by continued improvement in farming technology. Now this is from horse collars to new types of plows and gathering mechanisms for plants in the field, but not only that, new planting mechanisms. If you look at the seed drill and things along those lines. Not only that, we begin to see increased improvement in understanding of how fertilizer works, and use of fertilizer in the field, which means we can get more abundant crops in either the same amount or actually less space. And not only that, we start to figure out how it is that we can store our food so that it stays fresher longer, so that people can actually get at it in year over year, so that food isn't going to waste. And that's going to be really important when we look at how it coincides with improvement in transportation infrastructure, storing the food and then getting it out to other places where people can then consume that food also. Now, with the increase in population and also the Industrial Revolution, what we begin to see is a shift in migration, where people begin to move towards cities. And a lot of that has to do with the new jobs that are being created, but also you have situations where land is being bought up. Tenant farmers and poor farmers weren't able to afford the land that they had been using, and so that really that goes more into our conversation, the agriculture unit. But just know that what begins to happen with the improvement in agriculture, you have these larger farmers and people who are wealthier buying up all this land, forcing people to move off their land. But not only that, jobs become available in the city. So it's kind of this thing that works together. And then so the poor farmers begin moving to the cities to take the jobs that are created in the factories. Now there are some other agricultural revolutions that happen later that don't necessarily impact as much the more developed countries, but they begin to impact the less developed countries. And this is probably where today we're seeing the greatest impact of population growth. Because technologies and improvements in agriculture and medicine are making their way to less developed countries, where the survival rates were not as good until, probably the last 20-30 years, where these technologies begin making it over that way, so that people can not only live longer, but younger people can survive, and those types of things. So after the second agricultural revolution, really the next agricultural revolution to come about is what's called the Green Revolution. Again, we'll touch more on this in our agriculture unit, but basically we're looking at Western countries, more developed countries, trying to spread new type of seed technology to less developed countries, so that they can feed their own populations, and they don't have to purchase the food as much from the farmers of more developed countries, and farmers are able to have jobs, people are able to afford the food, those types of things. The other one is what's called the Bio-Revolution. Now, this is the one that's more recent. It deals a lot with the genetically modified organisms. We're talking about going into laboratories and messing around with the structural DNA of plants and animals to get them to improve in their crop yields, or their milk production, or meat production, or whatever. So you've probably heard of things that are going on. There's been a major pushback against a lot of the GMOs, because people are concerned about what impact the messing with DNA might have on our bodies and things like that. But we have to understand that all of these revolutions, really, whenever you have an increase in food supply, that just means that you can feed more people around the world. And so that means more people around the world get to survive, and I don't think anybody questions that that's good. We never celebrate people dying, I don't think, in terms of starving to death, but people do have some major concerns over how the GMOs and things like that are manufactured, and the impact it will have on society at large. And then there's the medical revolution, and again, this is not obviously an agricultural revolution, but what we're looking at is when Western countries begin spreading these medical technologies to poorer countries, and those medical technologies are mainly going to be impacting the younger populations, because we're looking at eradicating the diseases that have been not as big of a deal in the more developed countries. Different types of flus or other types of communicable diseases, like polio in the United States, that we've really been able to deal with a long time ago, but because of the lack of sanitation, lack of ability for people to get medical attention, or just be able to afford basic medical treatments, prenatal care, postnatal care for women and small babies, you have some of these issues. So as this medical technology makes its way over to less developed countries, the people are able to survive longer, so we see growing populations, and that's illustrated in this graph here, where we see really most of the growth that's happened since 1750 is going to be in the developing countries, because most of the growth that they were going to do, they are really already done, by the late 1900s or so. And so this is when we begin to even off, because of changes in society, and we'll talk more about this when we get to the demographic transition model, but changes in society, changes in position of women, changes in social stigmas against things like birth control, things along those lines. But because of the very rapid growth of people in poor countries, that's where we see most of the global population occurring today. And of course, the problem is that this is growth happening in places where the countries are least able to deal with it and afford the larger populations that they have in their countries now, because a lot of the growth is happening with children who are very young, and then the families are relatively poor. They're having difficulty, dealing with the children, because their economies are going through changes, and so their ability to provide for their children is going to change, because when you were an agriculturalist, you could grow your food, and you had to worry about school. You may be traded for clothing or something like that. But now, as their economies grow, as cities begin to grow and spread out, and take over farmland and things like that, richer farmers purchase farmland, poor farmers can afford it. Now these poor people are really stuck in a much different situation than maybe the agriculturalist would have faced a couple hundred years ago.